Hello, it's Wednesday morning. That means Garland Nixon and Scott Ritter are together, and we got big things going on. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here, and it's Wednesday morning, and I'm on with Scott Ritter. For those of you who don't know, every Wednesday, Scott and I do a show from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I have an alternative platform. It's a censorship-free, or possibly, I guess I should say it's a free speech platform, Rockfin, ROKFIN.com/Garland Nixon. Everybody go over there and join in case they toss me off of YouTube, just in case. And it doesn't cost anything to join. However, if you choose and you can afford it, you can become a sponsor of a subscriber, and a subscribers are $14.99 a month, or about $12.49 a month, or $12.40 something a month if you join for a year, because they give you a couple of free months. And Scott and I do our subscriber only platform, a subscriber only show. That's the one I do for my subscribers from 9 to 10 a.m. I show a good bit of it here, but please, if you can afford it, and if you can't, just become a member, and it doesn't cost anything, and you can see all my stuff with the exception of usually part of the show. Okay, Scott, one of the things that happened recently, and I thought of you because I thought of the issue of combined arms warfare. I thought of the issue of just giving somebody a random piece of equipment. Here you go. Here's a Bradley. Go attack the enemy, as though that's what warfare is about. There's no complicated, there's no networking of targets, none of that going on. Just put somebody in a Bradley and aim them at the target like these are the old holy Roman days. And even they had tactics and strategies. But there is a particular video which I'm going to bring up now, and a lot of people have been watching it. And what we see is a Russian T-90, it appears, who goes into battle. Apparently doesn't have a lot of backup in the area, but there's a drone watching, I guess, targeting, coordinating, etc. Use a lot of cursing, which is what happens which is what happens a lot in war times, understandably so. And but we see the tank engage. We see the tank back out and disengage. We see artillery come in. We see re-engage. We see what's combined arms warfare, where they only had one tank, but they used a combination of the tank, the communications and sighting of the drone, artillery, which seemed to be very, very accurate artillery. So I'm going to put the video on, Scott, and I'd like you to talk about what you think about the, there we go. I'm going to put the video on with no sound, Scott, and tell us about what you saw and what you think about my position. Anyway, what do we need to know about this particular incident?
Well, I mean, what we're looking at here is a platoon-sized advance by the Ukrainians using 2 tanks and I believe 6 troop carriers. On the left, you see this Russian tank approaching. Understand that's not the first time the Russian tank's done this route. It's going up a known route to prepared positions, taking advantage of a tree line to provide cover. So it came in, it fired. I believe it's already taken out at least one of the Ukrainian tanks. The Ukrainian column is coming into a prepared position. You're going to see that they're going to start to strike mines. So there's a minefield there, part of the barrier. The tank is withdrawn to cover. Now, remember, it's being directed by a drone. The drone is calling it in, calling what's happened. It's talking to artillery. You have the Russians providing artillery. Unseen is a second Russian tank in the background, which is providing cover support. So it's in the background, providing some fire support. But again, this tank moves forward to prepared positions. This is not, I mean, it's very courageous what they're doing, but this is a pre-planned operation. He's moving forward into terrain that he's already scouted out. He knows where he wants to go. He knows that he's screened off against the enemy. He's going to a place where he can see the enemy and fire on the enemy. So this is mobile defense. This is literally very effective defense carried out by the Russians. And even though we call it a 1-on-8, it's not a 1-on-8. It's a Russian team against the Ukrainian team, but the Russian team is doing a far better job because the mines going off right there. Those mines were laid by Russian soldiers to create a deliberate barrier. The artillery that's being put in is artillery fire again that has been another mine, more artillery. It's pre-planned fires. You have the drone overseeing, notifying people what's happening, providing eyes on target that otherwise wouldn't exist. This is modern day combined arms warfare in a defensive posture being waged by the Russians. When this video first came out, they made it sound like, this one Russian tank was running in and this insane charge into the enemy and defeating them. Those crews are heroes. They've been decorated as such, but it's not reckless what they're doing. What they're doing is part of Russian defensive tactics, and it's this kind of tactic that is literally just wearing the Ukrainians down. What's interesting, as the Ukrainians advance, they're advancing what they call the gray zone. And I think this part of the video is where you saw the other Russian tank coming up. There are 2 Russian tanks there. But this is the gray zone. Let's say, for instance, because this is war, that Russian tank that went forward got hit, got disabled. What would happen at that point in time is the second Russian tank would come forward and rescue those troops and get them out. But the Ukrainians would have succeeded in getting to that tree line. The Ukrainians would have declared that they have now just recaptured a big chunk of territory. But all they got was a tree line. And what's going to happen in that tree line is they're going to get hammered by artillery until they're all dead, and they'll have to withdraw back to where they started, which is because this other tree line that you see in the distance. This is what happens when Ukraine is saying we've recaptured territory. All they've done is taken territory that's part of the Russian crumple zone. This isn't even the Russian defensive line. This is the forward defensive line of the Russians. They will fall back to pre-planned defensive positions if the Ukrainians were successful in advancing. But the courage of the Russian soldiers combined with their technical competence and their overall operational superiority allows them to have this kind of victory repeated over and over and over and over again. This is happening every day on the field of battle. This just happened to be captured on video. These guys are getting highlighted. But when you read the award citations that are being handed out to Russian troops, it's always about Sergeant so-and-so, Lieutenant so-and-so, small unit commanders who are doing extraordinarily brave things like this in the defeat of the Ukrainian enemy. And look, those Ukrainian soldiers, they have more courage than I do. I have to tell you that. They're out there. These aren't cowards. Let's stop pretending these guys are cowards. They're not cowards. They're launching an attack against a prepared defensive position. They know what's coming forward. They know there's a minefield out there. They know there's artillery coming down. They know there's enemy armor out there maneuvering against them, and yet they continue to advance forward. They didn't succeed. They're not going to succeed, but these aren't cowards that are driving those vehicles. Those are brave men as well.
Scott, the other thing when I look at that, it also demonstrates the reality of this battlefield that that NATO is not acknowledging, and that is, it appears to be 1-on-8, but as you said, this is a team of people working, right? This is the difference between a bunch of people who have practiced, who have prepared. When you're coming up against a dug-in enemy, they didn't just dig in and just sit there and wait for you to come. They've practiced and rehearsed. If they come from this way, we'll do this. If they come up this alley, we'll do this. So you can send one tank because that tank knows where to go, what to do. Those areas sighted in on artillery, the minefields. We're only going to give you one alley. You're going to come right up that alley in the middle of the minefields, and everything there is ready to hammer you. And so oftentimes I've heard if you're attacking a prepared position, you need at least 3 to 1. If you've given the people this much time to prepare and this much area to prepare, even 3 to 1 doesn't give you a chance. We're looking at, in numbers, we're looking at 6 or 7 or 8 to 1 in the immediate numbers on the battlefield. But the immediate numbers we're looking at does not reflect the net-centric nature of warfare now, because in talking to Andrei Martyanov, that tank is now sighting in things, and the computer data from that tank, the computer data from that drone, all of these things are going to computers to go to a headquarters to sight everybody in, to sight it. You know what I'm getting at, Scott?
No, I know exactly what you're getting at. Yeah, that's modern war. But the thing that's frustrating for me when I look at this video is, I'm just asking the question. Why are you guys marching up a single lane? I understand that that's a single lane. Where's your overwatch? Okay, you only have 1 lane of advance. I understand that. But why the hell is that tank allowed to move up its thing without having my tank on over here blowing it away with a side shot? Why is that happening? Why haven't I scattered artillery mines on that line of approach to retard their ability to come in so that I can get to this tree line without worrying about the enemy coming with me? Where are just simple standard tactics that any modern force would employ? I'm not denigrating the courage of the Russians at all. Right. But I'm just saying that Ukrainians are making it very easy for the Russians. That drone shouldn't be in the air. That drone should be shot out of the sky. Even if it's in the air, it shouldn't be able to communicate. Why is the people who are looking at that drone communicating? I should be jamming the hell out of that signal. No, there should be no communication. I should be blowing the hell out of the Russian positions with artillery, suppressing them. Like I said, laying down rapid scatterable minefields so that as that tank comes forward, at a minimum, its tread's blown off and it's not going anywhere. I need to get to that tree line as quick as possible. There are mines there. I'm going to take a hit. I want my lead tank coming in with some mine rollers, but it may get hit, but that's okay. We come in, we push in, infantry gets out, clears out of space, you set up your fire positions, and now you have your fire going down on the Russians, and so you begin to push forward again with a base of fire supporting your maneuver. There's no base of fire for the Ukrainians. They are literally maneuvering in the blind, which is why the Russian, who has a base of fire, remember, there's a second tank there that nobody's seen. That second tank is providing overwatch support for this first tank as it moves up, just in case one of those Ukrainian tanks pops out at an unknown spot. Maybe the drone saw it, maybe it got jammed, couldn't communicate it, and a tank pops out. That overwatch tank going to hammer that tank, helping your other tank maneuver forward. And again, it's maneuvering forward to a prepared position. Why didn't you send infantry forward? Do an infiltration at night. Infantry come in and clear the minefield, set up in the tree line, put your anti-tank guided missiles in the tree line. So as the Russian tank comes in, you're able to hit it, suppress it, and now you bring your armor up as quick as possible. This just underscores the fact that Ukrainians are not up to the task of what they're being asked to do. They've received absolutely insufficient training. They have all the nice little toys out there. But those toys are being operated by brave men who don't know how to use them properly. This was the most tactically unsound advance, but every advance I've seen the Ukrainians make is one that would get you fired at a combined armed exercise in 29 Palms, California, or an NTC rotation at Fort Irwin. Any U.S. military officer who went forward with that battle plan would be fired because it's tactically inept, literally tactically inept. It's what I'm talking about, though, isn't impossible to do. It's common sense. It requires a modicum of training, a modicum of practice. But had they, for instance, instead of rushing this training forward, double or tripled the amount of time given to the Ukrainians to teach these basic concepts, then they might have had success. But that was an attack doomed to fail from the start.
And let me add this. There's another element, and I think that has to be taken into consideration. The T-90, the equipment, everything that the Russians are using, that's their border. Everything they're using is planned for their border. It's planned for the terrain of their border. It's planned for everything in that area, right? A bunch of those vehicles were something called MRAPs. You're familiar with MRAPs. What are they? Well, they were designed for the Middle East to deal with roadside bombs. They were designed under the bottom. They have like this V under the bottom, so that exactly. So your roadside bomb goes off underneath. It defects the blast. Yeah, it's gonna. They got crumple zones. They got all kind of things so that the crew inside lives. They ain't made to go up against a T-90 tank. They're not made for this, to go across this open terrain where you can take hits. Apparently, my understanding is that the Russian tank took some hits, but it's a main battle tank and it's made to take some hits from what you're going to throw at it. Yeah, if you can hit it with something big enough, you can take it out. So the other part of this is the U.S. has spent all this time planning to fight olive growers and farmers who grow poppy seeds, but to grow stuff, meaning the things that they shouldn't be growing in Afghanistan, who can take a roadside bomb and plant it and yank a string and blow something up, or you run over something. Okay, that's all good and fine. Doesn't this also show the other part, that NATO has been preparing to fight in the Middle East goat farmers, and now they're in a situation where they're saying getting an MRAP. An MRAP is not what you need in this environment, Scott.
No, and neither is a Striker, or neither is any of the most of the equipment that the United States has. We designed the M1, M2 combat team back in the 1980s. These were two weapon systems, the Abrams tank and the Bradley tank, that were meant to complement one another. We built tactics around them, and but remember, they operate that way, but we're supposed to also have the Apache helicopter working with them as a team. We're supposed to have the M109 Paladin, self-propelled artillery there as a team, maneuvering forward, providing dedicated fire support. We're supposed to have close air support that can come in and provide support, intelligence. All this stuff works together. An M1 by itself is just a death trap. It's not survivable on the battlefield. The Bradley by itself is a death trap. It doesn't work. You have to work with the team. It comes down to, again, what I talked about: firepower maneuver. You want to achieve fire superiority of the enemy, suppress them so that you can maneuver into an advantageous position. Now you go from superiority to supremacy. The enemy knows it can't win. It withdraws. That's just the basic ABCs of tactical combat. The equipment you have is just a tool for your tactics. But if you have equipment that's not up for the test, the MRAP is not designed to deliver troops to the forward edge of the battle area. It's not designed to close with and destroy the enemy for firepower maneuver. The MRAP is designed to convoy you from point A to point B on a road that has mines on it. That's it. It's not meant to be delivering troops straight into battle. It's just not designed to do that, but that's what the Ukrainians are used for, because that's what we've given them. It's a tall vehicle, which means that if you're maneuvering, for instance, trying to use those tree lines as a shield, the last thing you want is a vehicle that sticks out. It's an easy target. And again, just because it's designed to, the MRAP is not designed to defeat a mine. I hope people understand that. It's designed to absorb the mine, but the mine, in the process of the absorption, destroys the MRAP. It stops moving. So it has no utility whatsoever. You'd be much better off investing in more mine clearance capability than you would the MRAP. And give you need to give the Ukrainians things that provide overhead cover protection from artillery, that provide some protection from small arms fire as they're moving forward. The MRAP is not meant to be that vehicle. It has some capability, but it's not designed to be an infantry fighting vehicle. It is simply a transportation vehicle that's designed to take a hit from a mine and not kill everybody inside. That's it. That's all it does. Why we're giving it to the Ukrainians is beyond me. The T-90 tank, not just the T-90 is a brilliant piece of weapons designed by the Russians, but so are the upgraded T-72s. The T-80, I think, is a little bit more problematic, but they're doing some stuff to the T-80 to make it more survivable. It's one of those designs that didn't live up to the hype that the Russians wanted. But the T-90 is a very good tank, and it is designed to absorb damage. There's a video that I saw where a T-90 advancing in got hit 19 times from between mines and the different anti-tank weapons, including javelins, 19 times, and it kept on ticking. Now, I'm not going to vouch for the eardrums of the guys inside that tank, okay? I'm not going to sit here and say that their brains weren't turned into scrambled eggs, because they got hit by some heavy stuff. But they maneuvered forward, did their job, and they pulled back, and the tank was still functioning. It probably had to go into the depot to be repaired, and those boys probably had to go to the hospital to get looked at. But concussion protocol was definitely in play on this one. But the tank lived. You're taking a look at the Leopard getting hit once and it's out. These Western tanks getting hit once and they're out. The T-90 is taking multiple hits, and we saw that in this video. It did get hit. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't kill the T-90 one shot, one kill. Every tank has that point of vulnerability that if you hit it, it's des vidania for the crew inside. But the T-90 is designed to reduce those points of vulnerability, and as long as the tank is moving, so remember, movement is key to survival. A static target makes it easier to target. A moving target means that even when you hit it, it's going to be a deflecting round. It's going to be something that's not coming at the optimum angle. You're not going to get the optimum impact of the system on the tank. So a key aspect of the T-90 is mobility. It is a far more mobile system than anything the West is providing the Ukrainians. Take a look at the rate of advance of the Ukrainians and the rate of advance of the Russian tank. It's moving forward. I guarantee you, when it got hit, it was a deflect. It wasn't a direct hit. It was a deflecting hit, which the reactive armor will go off. It'll look impressive. It goes pop, but it's not a tank killing or a mobility kill type detonation on it. So the T-90 is a brilliant piece of engineering feat on the part of the Russians, and the West should sort of take a look at that. But that's not how we design tanks. We design tanks to be far larger. I mean, look at the speed of advance there. First of all, the guy knows what he's doing. He's driving up something that he's already reconnoitered. He knows that route. He knows there's no mines on that route, and he's going to a designated location that he's already scouted out. I'd like to know who's putting that smoke down. I think that's probably the Russians putting the smoke down to screen that tank moving forward, but it could be the Ukrainians putting the smoke down to screen their guys going forward as well. Although, they're having smoke screen you as you move into a minefield is never good. I wouldn't call that good thinking, but here he comes again. The speed of that tank, the speed of the advance. And he's going to a known location where he's already scouted out. Look at the confidence that he displays there. He's making a turn, exposing his side to an enemy, but he knows the enemy can't see him because he's already, reconnoitered. So he's going to come in. And now he's, this is a well-prepared. And the interesting thing about this crew is that two of them were mobilized. The two of the three-man crew were Mobiks, I guess they call them, guys who were mobilized. The other thing that was apparent in the interviews that they did is that they're from the Far East. They appeared to be Buryats or something of that nature, but to the Russians, they're Russian heroes. I mean, they don't call them, anything other than, citizens of the Russian Federation who are doing their duty to Russia. And that's how they view themselves, as citizens of the Russian Federation doing their duty. The driver, I believe, was a contract soldier, but the tank commander and the gunner were mobilized troops. And you're seeing well-trained, well-motivated. They're not running away. Anybody that told them that mobilized troops are going to run away in fear probably need to look at this video a couple times.
Yeah, and something that we discussed a while back, and that was when, and you've been talking about that, they mobilized these people, many of these people last September, right? And you kept saying they've got them in the back, but they ain't sitting back there eating popcorn watching the latest Barbie and Oppenheimer movie. They are training, they are planning, they are working together. So if they mobilized you last October, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May, June. You have had 10 months. And we can see in that, as opposed to guys that got taken to Germany or Poland and they just delivered some inadequate Bradley or something that won't even stop a 50 caliber bullet. You know, it ain't stopping a tank round. So you've got guys who, I'll put it like this. When I look at that video, when you listen to the guys talk, you can see this is very, very well coordinated. Now they are like, hey, these guys are going up, screw them over. You know, they're motivated. Yeah. But you can see, go forward, call artillery, back up, artillery hits, go forward. They're coming this way. You see, do we have anyone else out there? Who we got out there? We got these guys, send these guys forward. You see on one side, some guys kind of reticently, shall we say, kind of feeling their way along in these vehicles, and they're just coming along this road, and they're kind of looking around like, are their minds, are we? And they're taking. On the other side, you see a confident, well-trained group. And again, it's not to say that the Russians are superior or inferior. It's training. Speed up quickly. They come up, they act, they communicate, they disengage, they re-engage, they strike with artillery. You know what I mean? You see the difference between guys that have been training for 10 months and that have the equipment that they need. The drones, I had read like a few weeks back, one of the things that happened, the S-300, a very adequate system that the Ukrainians use. And they brought a bunch of them forward to use for the offensive, and the Russians figured out where they are, and they called it the S-300 genocide. They found out where they all were. The missiles in trashed them all. So now your drones fly. Everything flies. I don't have any air support. And let me add this. You think those guys are able to communicate? Hell no. Everything they got is jammed coming up there. You know, they're not going to be able to talk to each other. It's just suicide. Find a white flag at that point. You do not have a chance of survival. Am I overstating it, Scott?
A little bit. And this is what I'll say. What we're seeing here is one side of the fight. We're looking at it from the Russian perspective. All right, but let's examine what we're seeing from the Russian perspective. First of all, we're not talking about an overwhelming number of Russians. Why? Because what we probably didn't see before that is the Ukrainians put a hell of a lot of artillery down on the Russian positions. Every Russian that I've talked to, every account that I've read, they say that these attacks by the Ukrainians are preceded by a whole bunch of artillery, and the Ukrainians know how to use artillery, meaning that if the Russians have everything forward, they're going to get the crap pounded out, and people are going to die and all that. So first of all, the Russians have dispersed their defenses. That's why it's a layered defense. This is why we see a tank going forward, because the tank is back here. Behind the tank, you're going to find more infantry spread out and stuff in case there's a breakthrough. But the forward edge of the defense is about protecting power forward. The Ukrainians have already plastered the Russians with artillery. Every Russian I've spoken to talks about that before each one of these attacks, they're just getting hammered, which means that the Ukrainians are making an effort to soften up the Russian position. That's why you have a tank moving forward to a prepared fighting position. He's not already there. He's moving forward from a position he's had in the rear to receive the artillery fires. Those artillery fires are being supported by drones. The Russians speak highly of the Ukrainian drones. They say the Ukrainians they use drones very effectively. And so there's a Ukrainian drone out there doing the same thing the Russian drone's doing. The Russians do have effective electronic warfare, but it's not everywhere at once, especially if you have artillery fire preceding the attack. You're going to suppress a lot of Russian capabilities. And so it looked like those Ukrainians were moving up with a purpose. So it seems to me that they're coming in a timed associated with the artillery suppression. So there may or may not be the suppression of Ukrainian communications. This war is more complicated than it seems. That fight, what we're seeing is, the later stages of the fight where the Russians are effectively applying their tactics. But what we're missing is the Ukrainian artillery preparation, which I believe would have been extensive, which explains why you have so few Russian resources at that point, because the Russians have dispersed their combat power so as not to be suppressed and destroyed by the Ukrainians. And this is why sometimes you get Ukrainian tactical successes. Because as I said, all it takes is one shot from the Ukrainians against that T-90 tank to immobilize it. And then, and I've seen the videos of this too. Then the crew gets out, crew goes down, that second tank comes forward, and that second tank evacuates that crew and gets out of there. You don't see 50 tanks coming in. You see tanks working in pairs. And that second tank is to provide overwatch support and then rescue support for the lead tank in case they get hit. You know, and there's a lot of Russian tanks that get left in the crumple zone. They go forward, they get hit, the crew abandons, leaves, the Ukrainians advance. They now have that tank. They're now in the tree line. They're now in the tree line, and they've got a temporary tactical victory. That happens all the time. The Ukrainians don't always get beat at that initial point. The Ukrainians a lot of times get to that tree line, and when they get to that tree line, they then dig in. They bring in more troops, and then they move to the next tree line, and we start the process all over again. Eventually, what happens is what just happened. The Russians blunt the attack. They hit with artillery, then they push the Ukrainians out of each tree line. They take them back to their initial position. A lot of dead Ukrainians, a lot of dead Russians too. It's a bloody, bloody, bloody fight. So we're seeing one aspect of this, but I think the fight is far more complicated than that. The Ukrainians aren't just advancing to die. The Russians, give them full credit. They have really good artillery. They're at the point of the attack, something of this significance, they would have brought together a lot of artillery and they would have applied. Now, the Russians are firing counter battery artillery. They've got the Lancets back there. That's another part of the battle we're not seeing, is the Russian Lancets going out and hitting Ukrainian artillery that's firing and supporting these guys, disrupting the fire support for those Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians are doing the same thing to the Russians. Ukrainians have a lot of drones that are out there looking for the Russians too. There's this huge swarm of drones going back and forth on the battlefield. You talk to Khodorkovsky, read his blog. You read the blogs of others. You talk to people, and they just talk about how the Ukrainians have a lot of drones. And these are those small tactical drones that are out there buzzing around. My wife and I were going for a walk the other day. We're like, it's like a giant mosquito in my ear, and I'm like, that is the biggest mosquito somebody had a drone flying overhead. And I imagine that's hopefully you got one in the back there. I would hope, having heard that the drones they're using on the battlefield are more quiet because that's just an irritating noise. But I just think that this battle is far more complicated than that video simply showed. I think there's a lot of stuff going on. The Ukrainians, while we criticize, rightfully so, the level of training that they've had, they still know how to fight. They're not cowards. And their artillery guys are very good. They know what they're doing. And the Russians, this is a tough fight for the Russians. It takes good equipment. The T-90 is a good piece of equipment. It takes brave soldiers. Those three guys deserve every bit of bling that they pinned on their shoulder, their chests. But it also takes sound tactics, and the Russians have sound tactics. They have sound operational doctrine. They have this defense that they've planned is designed to absorb a much more concerted effort than what the Ukrainians have put in. I'll be honest with you: the Ukrainians have yet to test the Russian defenses in a significant fashion. That doesn't mean that there isn't heavy fighting there, but the Russian defenses are designed to have an enemy break through the crumple zone. The crumple zone's not supposed to stop you. It's supposed to hinder you. It's supposed to disrupt you. It's supposed to, make you pause, etc. But you are supposed to get through the crumple zone to the first line of defense. And the key thing about the first line of defense that people don't understand is you're not meant to stay in the first line of defense. The Russians don't do stand and die anymore. That was World War II. The Russians in the first line of defense will hold you. They will cause you to commit your forces forward. Then they're going to hit you, deflect you into a kill zone, hit you. But they assume that when you commit to an attack, you're going to have that 3-1, 4-1, 5-1 advantage that you should have. So they assume that eventually the enemy's going to get enough firepower forward, like I talked about, to suppress them and maneuver into a position. And so the Russians say, time to go back to our pre-planned fallback position. And they go back there. and the Ukrainians come forward, and then they hit them again. Then there's another layer, and so it's bounding retreat to the main defensive line, which the Ukrainians come to. Now, this is meant to hold them, but if it doesn't, then the Ukrainians have to do it all over again into the next line of defense, which means they've penetrated a line of defense. They have to come through that, but the second line of defense is meant to plug this and send counterattacking forces to pinch them off. Russia's done none of that right now. They're still in the crumple zone. They're still way up here in the crumple zone, and they're winning. The Ukrainians can't get through the crumple zone.
So if you get, so it looks to me like, all right, you get into the crumple zone, we knock out 10, 15% of your troops, we fall back. You get a little bit further, we knock out 20%. You know what I mean? Of your troops, of your power, you fall. We knock out a certain percentage of and we keep falling back and hitting you harder. You get to a certain point. Let's say we've knocked out 50% of your firepower, and now we've gotten you in a very small space, kill zone, and we've got pincher guys that can come in and, you know what I mean? It's back it up, make you weaker and weaker, and then surround you and swallow you up. So
right.
The bottom line is, even when you win, as I like to say, even if you win, you lose. Even if you continue to get forward, the further you get forward, the lower the probability of survival gets. And not that nobody may ever get through, but you're going to take such punishment to get through. Now, I would imagine that last line of defense they kind of have, that they're going to have reserves back, that even if you break through that, there's going to be more, right?
Yeah, I mean, of course, but I mean, the last line of defense isn't meant to get broken. If you break the last line of defense, you have successfully breached the enemy defensive position, and congratulations, you just won the battle. Right. That's what you're designed to do. But it's a very, it's a confusing thing. Look, the Marines, when in Desert Storm, we breached the Iraqi defenses, and then we went through. And in the confusion, the Iraqis did what they're doctrinally supposed to. They launched the counterattack. But we had those burning oil fields, and air power wasn't able to come in and interdict or see it. And we had, I think it was the 2nd Marine Division forward. They're not supposed to be on the front line of the battle, but they were forward, and the Iraqis got through, and the Iraqis launched a multi-battalion attack against the division command post. If it weren't for a lieutenant named Ray, who was in an LAV-25, which is a light armored vehicle with a 25 millimeter chain gun, bravely rushing forward and using light armored vehicle against Iraqi tanks in close combat, destroying them, and other Marines coming forward, the cooks, the bakers, the candlestick makers coming forward, light armored, anti-tank weapons to defeat that. The Iraqis would have done what they're supposed to do, pinch off the attack and blunt it, push them back. That's what the Russians will try to do. The key in an attack like this is not only to maintain the mass necessary, which means that forward element, you have to have follow-on echelons that are able to pass through a stalled or defeated force. Guys, when you launch an attack like this, the forward element is going to get defeated. It's going to get depleted. It's going to run out of oomph. That's okay. I mean, it's not okay for the guys up front. They're getting killed, but it's designed to do that. That's why you have the follow-on echelon that passes through them and continues the attack. You have to train for that passage of lines, by the way, because if you don't train properly, the attack bogs down right there, and then you get slaughtered with artillery. Keep the momentum going. But as that momentum's going, you have to continuously suppress the enemy's ability to break up your attack. That means that you have to have air power going in and blowing up that artillery in the rear. You have to be bringing up your own artillery to suppress all this stuff. Ukrainians have none of that taking place. So these Russian defenses are going to work as designed because there's going to be nothing to deplete them, nothing to suppress them. And this is the tragedy of all. Yes, the Ukrainians have effective artillery in the initial phase of the attack. But understand, if the Ukrainians ever got that breakthrough, that artillery's got to move up. And as soon as it starts moving, Russian air power is hitting it that with those Fab 250s, Fab 500s, blowing them up, destroying them. The Ukrainians have no chance, none whatsoever. These are some brave troops. I mean, sometimes you get tears in your eyes watching them because you're just going, I just wouldn't want to be in that vehicle with these guys moving forward, knowing that you're going to have a bad day. but they move forward anyways. And when they fight, ask the Russians. The Russians are like, these guys fight like dogs, man. And I mean, that's in a positive way. These are fighters. You know, the thing the Russians often say is we're fighting ourselves. The same tenacity that we see amongst ourselves, we're seeing with the Ukrainians. We're fighting ourselves. It's just that we have better tactics, we have better support, we have a better plan, we have better leadership, better communications. But the Ukrainian soldier, they're tough. They're losing a lot of their tough guys, and they're replacing them with these guys that get thumped on the head and sent in. And these guys are surrendering. I mean, you're seeing a lot of these guys that are getting dragged out of the streets. They're getting to the front lines. They don't have any training. They were given 3 days of training. Here's your weapon. Here's how you load it, pull the trigger, and they get to the front line. They're either dying, being wounded and evacuated, or they're desperately looking for a way to surrender to the Russians. They don't want to fight.
One other thing I was thinking about, Scott, and that is, okay, let's say you get 5,000 Ukrainian soldiers breach. They get through this area, they get through, and they get all the way through the last line of defense, right? And they are now past the line of defense here along this, this battle line, and they get through there, right? Okay, they got through. You got kind of what you wanted, right? Now you got let's say 10,000 troops on the other side of the Russians' lines. Don't they need more ammo? Don't they need more food? Don't you now have to, that line that you cut through the Russian line, because this thing is like 800-mile long, right? And you got let's say a 10-mile wide, 5-mile wide line. You cut through that thing like a hot knife through butter. You made it to the other side. The Russians are like, oh crap, they got through right here, right? But you have to maintain that 5 or 10 mile, whatever that wide open, so you can continue to bring in ammunition, to bring in food. You know what I mean? Once you get that success, how do you hold? Those guys are sitting there. Now they're vulnerable to standoff strikes from missiles. Once you get through, you got additional problems. You now have to have air defense for the guys who are on the other side, things of that nature. Scott.
No, you're right. But again, if this is only about carving a narrow path through, you're screwed. But as you're attacking, as I get that initial breach, the first thing I'm going to do is widen the breach. Before I go forward, I'm going left and right, and I'm widening the breach. I'm building the breach up, and as I do that, I'm bringing in additional lanes, and I'm not going on a single lane. I'm going to be getting another lane and another lane. I want 3 lanes. I want 4 lanes of traffic into this breach so that I can start moving troops in aggressively. So I widen, I expand, and now I move forward. And every time I move forward, as I move forward and continue to widen, I'm pushing the enemy back on my flanks to create this wider breach. This is training. This requires a lot of troops, by the way, a whole bunch of troops to accomplish this. So by the time you get your 5,000 guys through the breach, there's not any enemy left. You've killed them. You've driven them off. You've created this sustainable breach. So now you're through, and those 5,000 guys can be resupplied, replaced, because I'm just telling you right now, the boys that make it to the other end, they're done. They're exhausted. They're done. You need to have fresh troops come in and replace them and get them back so they can get some rest and get replenished, because this is the hardest kind of fighting there is. But it's not just about taking a laser beam and cutting a thin line, because if you do that, first of all, that route's unsustainable. It's going to be under fire. That advance, that breach, has to be something where you can maneuver without direct fire coming from the enemy. So you got to push the enemy back. You have to have these flank protective forces pushing the enemy back. You may get hit by artillery, but that's why you have aircraft and your own artillery suppressing that artillery, so you can push forward. And if you're not doing that, then none of this is gonna matter, because even if you get that limited breach, like you said, hey, we made it through, then you're looking behind and you've been cut off, you're surrounded, you're going to die.
One more thing, you've done some great work on a documentary called Agent Zelensky. There is we're going to look at this Politico article real quick. I'm going to bring it up on the screen. That gives me great pause. If I were Vladimir Zelensky and I saw this, I'd start being concerned about meeting an untimely demise. Ukraine's plan if Russia assassinates Zelensky, right? And they go on to talk about, what they would do. And so what happens next if he dies, what the laws are there, how what they would. So they're basically, when I look at this, if I'm Zelensky and I see the treacherous people like Victoria Nuland and Sullivan and these things suddenly start to say, be ashamed if something happened to poor old Garland. Love that guy, but if something happened to him, those Russians, they may do him in. But if that happens, we got a plan. Don't worry about it. If they take Garland out, if I'm like they're saying that about me, I'm like, hey, what's all this stuff? Do you get a feeling that maybe they're revealing a plan here, Scott?
Well, first of all, I think if the Russians wanted to take out Zelensky, he'd have been taken out already. I don't believe the Russians are going to take out Zelensky because everything about their negotiating position has been, we are negotiating with the Zelensky. If you go back, I firmly believe that the core negotiating stance of Russia is linked to that agreement that Putin held up in the agreement that was initialed in March by the Ukrainians. It talks about security guarantees and things of that nature. I think it's been adapted to take into reality the fact that Russia now has 4 new oblasts, Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea. Those 5 territories will never go back to Ukraine. But once you get past that territorial concession that Ukraine's going to have to make, I don't think Russia is actually leaning forward to take Odessa and Kharkov and Mykolaiv and Dnipro, because that requires, remember, Russia's not just negotiating with Ukraine, they're negotiating with the West. They need to get the West on board. They need the West and Ukraine to accept the inevitability that these territories will forever be Russia. But beyond that, Russia has said, we need demilitarization, denatoizing your military. We need you never to be part of NATO. And we need you to do something about the Banderists. But once that's done, you're Ukraine. You're a neutral country. You want to join the European Union? Join the European Union. You want security guarantees? Please sign whatever agreements you want with the United States and everybody else. As long as it's not Article 5 NATO, we don't care. And that's the position I think Russia is looking at right now. A modification of the thing that already happened, and that was negotiated with Zelensky. What happens if you pop Zelensky? Can you guarantee the outcome? That was the big question we always asked in the 1990s. What happens if we get Saddam? What happens after that? We don't know. But why don't we keep Saddam? Because he's the devil we know. We can. There's no unknowns with Saddam. We got that one down. But if you kill Saddam, replace him, you might get somebody more competent. You might get somebody crazier. You might get something that you don't know. It's an unknown. Zelensky is a known. We can. The Russians, I think, can deal with him, and the West can deal with him too. The West hasn't had to deal with Zaluzhny. They, in a capacity beyond that of the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces. What happens if we knock off Zelensky and we say, okay, Zaluzhny, you're the man, and Zaluzhny says, yeah, but we're going to do it my way now. I'm not Zelensky. We're going to do it my way. We're like, well, wait a minute. That's not what we wanted. We wanted somebody. Boy, we wish we had Zelensky again. So I think Zelensky's got job security for the foreseeable future. I think that Zelensky is going to be the guy going forward from the Russian perspective. But as you said, this isn't about Russia knocking off Zelensky. This now we're getting into. I think what the question is they're seeking an answer to is, what is the post-Zelensky reality? Because he's becoming more and more of a liability to the West. He's becoming a liability to Ukraine. His if you take a look at the reshuffling that's going on right now, there's a power struggle taking underneath Zelensky, where people are maneuvering to be in a position to take. If you read that article, I think the the line of succession goes to the Speaker of the Parliament. That's the constitutional line of succession. But nobody, I can give you an absolute guarantee, that person will never be the leader of Ukraine. Because the way Ukraine's structured is, even though constitutionally that person has authority, they've got no authority right now. Ukraine is not a democracy. It's being run as a dictatorship, a military dictatorship. The person that more than likely will take over is Yermak, the chief of staff of Zelensky, who's been consolidating all the power under him. So even though Zelensky's up here, he's more or less a figurehead. Yermak is running the entire show underneath him. Yermak said, now Yermak is in opposition to the Zaluzhny crowd. Zaluzhny's got the military on its side. So if Zelensky goes, there will be a power struggle between Yermak and the Zelensky presidential administration, which is really the Yermak presidential administration, and Zaluzhny and the military. And then the question is, where will the West come in? Because if the West comes in on the side of Yermak, Zaluzhny can't afford to come in and sweep Yermak away because he'll lose the support of the West. But the West could very well come down and say, Yermak, you're just nothing but a corrupt extension of the Zelensky disaster. We want Zaluzhny coming in. And so what this article is doing is running through various scenarios. I think it's designed to educate people about the complexity of the Ukrainian domestic reality. But it's not Russia that's going to take out Zelensky. If Zelensky's taken out, he's going to be taken out by Ukrainians or by the West. Just asked old Diem in Vietnam, who thought he was America's boy, only to find himself bleeding out on the floor when a CIA-backed assassination took him out of power.
Yeah, we could go on and on. You could look at the U.S. helping Saddam Hussein get into power. On and on and on. Help training, the Mujahideen, and then eventually they put a bullet in what's his name, Bin Laden, who at one point was their guy. So there is a historical precedent set for the U.S. Over the course of time, having one of their guys eventually becoming inconvenient and meeting an untimely demise, as if there's such thing as a timely demise. I don't know. I guess if I live to be 100 and I finally croak or something, I'll call it a timely demise. But as far as this, if I'm Zelensky, I'm looking at that, man, and I put it like this. At first, I was going to say I'm going to call. There ain't no point in calling anybody in Washington. All they're going to say is, "Nah, bro, everything's fine. Don't worry about it. You're good." If they
go back home. Go back home. Get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go back to the targeting coordinates that we have set in to make sure that
your home is in grid 35H 15W, right?
Yeah, you'll be safe there from the Russians. Yeah,
the Russians aren't going to kill Zelensky. I don't believe so.
Nah, they have no need to at this point. I think they got bigger fish to fry, and I think we don't have time to talk about. We'll move on. We need to talk about Africa, Niger. There's big doings going on there right now. Big doings. The U.S. has the biggest drone base in the world, I think, in Niger. We heard about the other year. We heard about Niger. It was, hey, a couple of American soldiers died in Niger, and everybody was like, "What, the Niger? What?" Yeah, but that's where the uranium comes from. And now we have I'll get a last comment from you. We have this meeting in Russia. We have these African soldiers and African leaders in Russia saying, we got to fight for Africa. We're sick and tired of the French taking our crap. We've had enough of this, right? And within hours after this thing ends, there's a coup. And the French seem to be getting, and we've got Algeria. We've got Burkina Faso. We've got Mali. We've got Guinea. All of these West African countries saying, if you attack Niger, we're likely to join in the fight. Just a quick comment on that. Very interesting stuff, Scott.
No, absolutely. Look, the countries you just named, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Mali, and now Niger, they all have one thing in common.
Algeria. Yeah.
But Algeria is separate because it's not part of this organization called ECOWAS.
Yes.
Which is the West African. It's a West African economic military alliance that the United States, the European Union, France has created so that they march to our drum. What they all have in common is they used to be members in good standing, but they're all suspended now because they've all had military coups to oust pro-Western, pro-French leaders. And so you see ECOWAS now divided. ECOWAS had a meeting an emergency meeting where they said if constitutional order isn't restored, they will intervene militarily. This is something ECOWAS has done in the past. If you remember in the Gambia, I think 2017, there was a move and ECOWAS moved in and the order was restored and all this kind of stuff. The difference here is that, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, to a lesser extent, Guinea, they all have viable militaries that know how to fight. And the militaries are in charge. Mali and Burkina Faso didn't say we might get involved. They said any attack on Niger is an attack against us, and we will be at war with you. Algeria, although they're calling for the restitution of constitutional order, has said straight up, any attack on Niger by an outside power, we will be compelled to come to defense of Niger. And Algeria's got significant military presence. Unspoken in all this is Russia and Russia's role. I think the more likely thing for Algeria will become the conduit for Russian military equipment to be brought in. We have Wagner already in Mali. We know Wagner's in Mali. Wagner could very well be in Burkina Faso by this time, although that would be unofficial at this point. I don't think there's been any official recognition. Wagner was not behind the Niger coup, but if you force the issue, and it becomes necessary for the coup plotters, the junta, in order to stay in power, have to receive Russian military assistance. Wagner becomes the logical vehicle to make that happen. So we're seeing not just anti-Western activity taking place, a rebellion against French, post-colonial, policies, but we're seeing Russia filling the vacuum, and the vehicle to fill that vacuum is official Russian government support. But then the security assistance is done through the vehicle of the Wagner Group, which is alive and well and living in Africa.
Prigozhin don't go down that easy, does he? One day he's terrible. He's gone. He's been banished to Belarus, thrown, sent to like Star Wars. They sent him to a planet in the outer reaches of the galaxy, never to be seen again. Next thing you know, we find out, he wasn't in Belarus. He was meeting with Putin on the day that they said he was. What? And I'm like, what? And he's been in Russia the whole time. And then I look. He's at the African summit. He's smiling. He's glad in, and I'm
shadow summit. Yeah,
there's more to this Prigozhin thing that meets the eye, Scott. I'm awful suspicious.
Well, I know he's done in Ukraine. He made a huge mistake.
Right.
Wagner's out of Ukraine, and they're out of Russia. I mean, the bottom line is, their major training ground has been shut down, and they're not recruiting anymore because, well, first of all, a key aspect of the Wagner compact is that the soldiers who sign a contract with Wagner are guaranteed employment, meaning that if you join Wagner, you're not going to be sitting on your butt twiddling your thumbs. Now, when Ukraine was in session, they could all go down and fight in Ukraine. That was employment. Right now, the only show in town is Africa, and to a lesser extent, Syria.
And Belarus, building some bases in Belarus.
They're training bases.
Okay.
And they're already actively training there, but they have enough jobs for the people. They can't absorb any more people, so they've shut down recruiting. But their St. Petersburg headquarters is still there, the Wagner Center, and it's running the global operation. And the global operation is running hand in glove with the Russian government. I mean, the Central African Republic contract has been re-upped. Wagner's very much there. Mali is there. All those heavy weapons that Wagner turned in Ukraine, remember, they're receiving these heavy weapons in Mali. Ask yourself, does Wagner have its ability to produce the Pantsir surface-to-air missile defense system on its own? The answer is no. It's produced by the Russian government, who has given it to Wagner, who's operating it in Mali. So Wagner is in Africa in a meaningful way. And I think you're going to see Wagner expanding its role in Africa. And this is interesting because the United States and Europe have designated Wagner as a criminal enterprise. And we've said that they represent one of the greatest threats to, our ability to operate in Africa. And so now this conflict in this brewing war, this is This could be a huge war. This isn't going to be a little border skirmish. This is going to be armies moving against armies with aircraft and all that. This can become another proxy conflict between Russia and the West, this time in Africa. And I will have to tell you that right now it's advantage Russia. People say, well, wait a minute, there's 1,100 U.S. troops in Niger. Yeah, they're all on an air base that's surrounded right now. You know, and if the Nigerians say we want this thing gone, they can make it go away. The same thing. There's 100 Germans. The Germans are in a panic right now. We got 100 Germans in Niger. First of all, the Germans don't know how to fight. They're not there to fight. They're there to train. So you know they have to either be evacuated or whatever. But how do you get? Have you looked where Niger is? It's in the middle of Africa. There ain't no port. It's not like we can bring in the Marines and land at a port. Any Marines that have to come in are going to be helicoptered in off of, you know, amphibious shipping operating off of the coast of West Africa. That's a difficult logistical sustainability operation. They may have to seize an airfield, but now you have to fly airplanes in with the potential of getting shot down. How do you project that air power forward? We have to have aircraft battle groups off of the coast. Now, we're talking about a major deflection of power. And if this war doesn't end, it becomes very difficult to sustain, especially if Russia establishes a military lifeline stretching from Algeria into Niger, into Mali, etc. This could be a very big problem for the West and a very tragic outcome for the people of West Africa.
You're right. Yeah. I think the West, looking at, there's dust-ups going on in Syria, looking at the Pacific region right now. You know what I see? Here's the term: imperial overstretch.
Yeah.
The U.S. empire. You've stretched. You've tried to control the world, and now you have other superpowers who have the ability to push back. And you're going to have problems. Thanks a lot, Scott Ritter. We got to both run, so I certainly appreciate it. Everybody, go to Scott Ritter Extra, scottritterextra.com. He has some great work he's doing there. Agent Zelensky is a video. Watch that. Make sure you share it. He's got a couple of those out now. Also, when you go to scottritterextra.com, make sure that you do everything. There's options there to support Scott Ritter. Hey, the guy's got to eat. He's got a family to support, and he does good work, so he needs you to help him so he can continue the work. Scott Ritter, thanks a lot. scottritterextra.com. We are